Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our fourth and final for this year speaker in our Benicia Sustainable Backyard program. As you know, the program, our main objective is to bring a concept of permaculture in Benicia and build, as of now, 10 demonstration, we call them seed plot, food forests, so that all of us could go visit and see what it actually means to have a permaculture planting on your own land. Actually, my personal road to permaculture started with a little book called Tending the Soul Garden, and I knew nothing, and I really couldn't even imagine that the concept of what sounded like agriculture could be used in my personal development and in my soul. I didn't know Denise then, so I just read that book, and I was really in disbelief how simple and how profound that application was. So we developed this program, and we've met few, I would say, technical, experts on permaculture, people who really know how to plant the, trees and plants, and they got the technical knowledge. So I'm really happy to introduce Denise Rushing, who would round it up for us and talk about social and personal permaculture. Denise Rushing, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I'd like to start with a story. Once upon a time, nearly 14 billion years ago, we flared forth as light. We underwent a series of irreversible transformations until we arrived where we are, here and now, in this moment, telling a story about our journey. It took a while, but that's how far we've come. We essentially burst forth as light, changed a little bit, and then together with our fellow travelers, ended up on this beautiful blue planet in a dark sea of space. Now, if that isn't miracle enough for you, as a result of these transformations, we can now contemplate that journey. We have the capacity to imagine and understand that journey, that original flaring forth nearly 14 billion years later. So we're energy transformed, contemplating that energy that first flared forth. So I'd like you to just pause for a moment and let that sink in. Thomas Berry and Brian Swim, in their book, The Universe Story, call our understanding of this epic a new cosmology. The new story, they were among the first to document that this wasn't just a physical transformation happening, but it was a psycho-spiritual transformation as well over time. The unfolding of consciousness, as well as the unfolding of matter over space and time. This is what is called a cosmology. It's essentially the underlying story that all other stories come from. It provides a context for us. It's a creation story, really, a way to make sense of everything in the world. And the new story of how this came to be comes none too soon, because human commerce is fundamentally destroying the biosphere on our planet. Our own being, and all of us, so many of us, are in our interactions, particularly our economic interactions, are really putting the biosphere of planet Earth under attack. But that story, I like to start with it because it can remind us that we are all paragraphs in the story. We can take solace in what has happened so far, and we can learn from planet Earth, who is teaching us to this day. There have been many times in this epic story along the way where the whole experiment of life could have ended. There was a time 2.5 billion years ago when there was a noxious gas that emerged from all of life. It was generated from some of the earliest life forms, and it poisoned the atmosphere. It even etched the rocks, and it threatened all of life. Life could have died right then. Earth's story could have ended right there, and we could have been a rock floating in space. But the story did not end at that point in time. The gas was oxygen. And at that time, the creativity of life saved us. Mitochondria were born. And they were independent creatures that later became parts of cells. They turned oxygen into fuel and furthered the adventures of life. So the creativity triumphed. So our creativity saved us. Then there was the time 65 million years ago, I think we know this one more than we know most stories, where an asteroid hit Earth and filled the skies with soot and smoke and debris that blocked out the sunlight. Life could have nearly perished at that point as well. But at that point in time, small mammals who could go underground ended up carrying forth the story of life on planet Earth. Once again, creativity triumphs, life survives. So, one of the recent characters in the story, Thomas Berry, suggested that humans are called to a great work, that everyone without exception has a role in the work of their time. And it's my belief at this moment in time that the great work of the human being is to bring humanity back into right relationship with the life-giving systems of the planet. We need to reach into our deepest knowing and our deepest creativity to do that, and each discover our own paragraph in the great story. So we're facing this crisis where the chemistry of life on Earth is changing, and our forms of commerce are causing the change, and our very proliferation of our species is causing it. So here's my thinking. We need to get creative. And it's not the kind of creativity that creates more versions of toothpaste or more lawn furniture. It's the kind of creativity that allows us to thrive in a system that is under siege, and an economic system that's really hostile to those of us who are sensitive to what's happening. And I see it, the creatives are going to lead the way. The entrepreneurs, the creative artists, and those of us who have that level of sensitivity to what is happening. But in order to lead the way, we need to survive and thrive first. And for me, it was very nice of Elena to mention my book, Tending the Soul's Garden. And if the truth be told, I wrote this book as a handbook for myself. What Elena did not mention is that 8 years ago, I was elected to public office in my local community on a platform of transformation and ecological. Really, it was about I was running on an ecological platform, and apparently the people agreed with what I was saying and managed to elect me. I ended up displacing an incumbent that was in office, which in Lake County was unheard of at the time. And it wasn't even remotely about me. It was about the wave of change that needed to happen there. But for me, being in public office, suddenly I was in what I would consider a hostile ecosystem. And I've been at it now for 8 years. So I would say I'm somewhat of an expert on how to thrive in hostile ecosystems. And I wrote this book because I discovered permaculture. And for me, permaculture became a very hopeful practice in focusing on what I could do personally, and focusing on small things, but putting in a context of making a big difference. So I learned that everything was a garden. This quote from Buckminster Fuller, for me, says it all. You can't change things by fighting the existing reality. You will wear yourself out. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So what's the new model? And for me, we learn from Earth. The living systems of this blue planet teach us so much. And that's what permaculture is all about. Permaculture means permanent agriculture. How many of you already know about permaculture? Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir here. You know what permaculture is. What you may not the reason you might be here is to say, well, what's this application of permaculture? Because permaculture is infinitely creative. It's one of the most amazing forms of creativity in that it is a study of the systems of planet Earth and how to garden with them, farm with them, change human systems with them, etc. And I'm going to be walking around and pushing this button a lot, I can see. The cool thing is that Earth already knows how to Earth. And you don't need to haul truckloads of fertilizer into old-growth forests in order for those forest trees to survive, right? Earth already knows how to live in cycles. Earth already knows how to do that. Somebody want to?
We're thinking of moving.
Yeah, you want to move the table? Can you do that?
It's going to change the picture a little bit.
That's okay, because they're big pictures. Yeah.
Thinking of your.
Yeah, there's not a lot of words on here. But I started with the phrase, everything is a garden, and I would ask that you consider the question, what gardens are you tending? What gardens are you tending? If everything is a garden, might it be the garden of community? It might be the garden of family. It might be the garden of your own personal outlook or personal growth. It might be an actual garden in your backyard. It might be, in our case, this is on our farm in Upper Lake. It might be a garden. What gardens are you tending? So we start with that. But really we start with the soil. And that's the premise in tending the soul's garden too, is that no matter which garden we are tending, we start with the soil in the garden. So anybody who's into gardening knows that if you have really crummy soil, that you're not going to have good plants. Your plants will be subject to disease, they'll be subject to insects. But if you have really super good live soil, rich soil, that you plant seeds and it's like magic. The gardens just happen. So the philosophy of starting with soil in a community or even in yourself is how I've applied permaculture. And this is why I wrote the book for myself, because I'm facing this gardening exercise of trying to thrive in a hostile ecosystem. And I realized, I saw the parallel because I'm an organic farmer and gardener, and I'm in community, and I've been in corporate technology, and my background is actually energy technology. And I realized that if I start with the soil and I pay attention to the nutrients in the soil, that the plants that emerge from that will be healthy if the soil is right. So I began to ask myself the question, well, what are the nutrients? What are the nutrients I need in this soil? In a garden, obviously, you grow plants with whatever, hopefully the right nutrients for those plants. But what about for our own selves? What are the nutrients I need? Personally, I need play, I need beauty, I need time away, I need contemplative time, I need rhythmic structure in order to be creative. So my rhythmic structure might be meditation and exercise every day so that I can have that rhythm. I need the cycles, the rhythm that happens with the cycles of the seasons. I need joy. I need gratitude. So what are the nutrients that I need to cultivate in my own garden? And I can tell you what they're not. They're not cynicism. I don't want to cultivate that. If I feel cynical on a particular day, I will not be doing this. You know, I would choose to not speak on those days, because that's not the energy that I want to put out into the world. A colleague of mine, Drew Dellinger, how many of you heard of Drew? A few of you have. He's a poet, a scholar, and an entrepreneur, and he experienced a huge shift in worldview as a young man when he encountered the news story. So the news story is a nutrient for me, knowing where we sit in the bigger picture of things. He heard Thomas Berry say, we're here to celebrate. We are the space in which the universe reflects on itself and celebrates. And when Drew heard that, it made sense to him. It became a nutrient in his world. And he said to me, capitalism, consumerism, advertising, that didn't make much sense to me. War, racism, sexism, economic exploitation, that didn't make much sense. Those aren't nutrients that serve me. Working an occupation that one feels is grinding one's soul down on a daily basis and doing it for 50 years' time, that didn't make much sense. But the human as a space in which the universe itself can celebrate and reflect on itself, now that made sense. And this was Drew as a young college student. And so he became an artist, a poet. And he started to create from that place of resonance, that place that made sense to him. And his poem, Hieroglyphic Stairway, actually was read in the halls of Congress recently. I'd like to read a few lines of that poem, if you don't mind. This is Hieroglyphic Stairway by Drew Dellinger. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake. Because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do when the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? What did you do once you knew? Well, unfortunately, that poem came to me early, and it just rang so true for me. So what did you do once you knew? I got into the state of anxiety of, like, I got to save the world, right? So, over my 56 years on planet Earth, many life events have evoked growth in me, but nothing has challenged me more deeply than to try and introduce a new worldview into a system that doesn't accept it. Nothing is harder than that. Existing ecosystems are hostile to something new. But that shouldn't be any surprise to those of you who are organic gardeners or permaculturists. Existing systems are hostile to something new. So perhaps as an individual you can relate to that. If you're a person of deep sensitivity and you see things going on in the world that are an affront to that sensitivity, you know that it creates some anxiety at the very minimum. So that was true for me, and starting with my family of origin, moving into my corporate life, I was facing hostile ecosystems, it seems, wherever I went. And no surprise, that was true in political life. I would enter a system and I would immediately say, this system's got to change. Something's wrong with it, because it's not resonating, it doesn't feel right to me. And in the back of my mind, I might also be entertaining the idea that maybe there was something wrong with me. I always keenly felt that push and pull. It was like organ rejection. I always felt somehow different, and I perceived things differently. I was sensitive to the deeper energies, I guess. And so at some level I knew that I needed to learn not only how to survive in difficult systems, but how to thrive while fundamentally transforming them. It seems to me that's been my purpose, to enter into sometimes through the front door and sometimes through a side door, into these systems, find the points of leverage, the places where you could put a little bit of energy and have the system accept that energy and maybe transform. It's actually a thrill to get into a system like that and to discover the points of energy when it actually works, right? You put something in and people don't even know why things changed. They just did. So you start with the soil, and the second thing is the ecosystem approach. Look at it as a system. Find those places of energy. These are a couple transformations that were underway in our area. This is the farm before and after. This is the transformation. Actually, this is a creation of one of the food forests on our orchard. You know, it's monoculture, and we're trying to introduce different kinds of plants, and there's a real challenge. The problem is an opportunity here. That's one of the tenets of permaculture. The problem of walnut trees, which is where we are, is that they produce a substance in the soil that discourages photosynthesis in some plants, and so we needed to find out which plants liked them and which didn't, and the opportunity really was learning how to create a food forest from plants that like walnuts as well. So that's an interesting opportunity there. And then transformation of community, and this is a story actually that I do tell in my book. This is a little lagoon off of Clear Lake that, and for those, how many of you are familiar with Clear Lake up north? How many of you have been there recently? What do you know about Clear Lake? Algae.
Arsenic.
Arsenic. Actually, arsenic's not as big a problem as you might think, but mercury is a problem in Clear Lake. And biologically available mercury in particular. So Clear Lake is the oldest lake in the Northern Hemisphere. It's one of the most biologically diverse lakes in the world, and it was written about in Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. When farming in the region created with DDT actually began to decimate the grebe population, and the grebes came back after the DDT was eliminated. But Clear Lake is, this is where I'll introduce one of the concepts that really has helped me a great deal in tending the soul's garden, but also tending the garden of community, and that is the concept of a limiting factor. And I'll tell two stories related to it, and then I'll talk about what's going on in this picture. Story number one is, what is a limiting factor? Well, if you're a tomato plant and you're in the ground and there's a trace nutrient that's missing in that soil, you could add all kinds of fertilizer to that soil. If the trace mineral isn't there, that tomato plant isn't going to thrive because that trace mineral is something it needed. That was its limiting factor to growth. Once you put that mineral into the soil, the plant can grow until it finds its next limiting factor. Right? There's always one limiting factor. Well, in the case of Clear Lake, so now we'll turn it around. The limiting factor for cyanobacteria, which is the blue-green algae that Clear Lake has in the last 5 years has become known for in August. And by the way, it's only there in August and sometimes a little bit in September. But the news will tell you, if you watch the news, it's like there all the time. And it's not there on the whole lake either. It's there. It's at certain parts of the lake. But the news shows it as if Clear Lake is covered with this, right? But this particular little lagoon had a challenge with that blue-green algae. And blue-green algae, for millions of years, in fact, it was, I think, one of the creatures that helped create the oxygen to begin with. So it's been around for millions and millions, billions of years. And it lived as a background species in Clear Lake up until about 7 or 8 years ago. It was a background species. It wasn't a dominant species. Something shifted in the ecosystem. Whatever its limiting factor was eliminated. We think it might be phosphorus, but whatever its limiting factor was, reached the threshold, and suddenly it becomes the dominant species. The good news with that is that we can reduce, if we figure out its limiting factor, we can work on that one nutrient and take it back down and let this thing become a background species once again. There's a different kind of algae that's actually much more natural for Clear Lake in a healthy Clear Lake, and that comes around, but it's not the kind that is causing the news stories. Well, in this particular project, this was a project just in a little lagoon off of Clear Lake that had enough of a contained ecosystem we could test it out. And what we did was we introduced, let's just show you how systems work. We introduced a little floating island wetland, which with this one didn't have a circulation pump or anything. It was just like a big Brillo pad. It had a lot of surface area associated with the little floating island, and we planted some cattails and tules in there. And the goal of that little floating island was to take up the nutrients that might be used by the algae in that little lagoon. And actually it worked. We had this really healthy little floating island right there. Now, as it turns out, cattails are like a little hors d'oeuvre for otters. So it became a nice little platter for the otters. They would swim underneath and eat the cattails. So we actually have since put different kinds of plants in there. The system always adapts. It always adapts. But this
Otters knocked out the cattail?
The otters ate the tubers.
Okay. They killed off the cat.
They killed off the cattails. Yeah, so here are the cattails first planted. Here they are really healthy. And then I don't have the picture of them decimated again, but it worked. This worked, this little floating island wetland, using, working with nature to understand what was happening in that system and working with that limiting factor. The ecosystem approach is what we were working on there. Okay, so the third principle is a principle of energy flow. Paying attention to the flow of energy in a system. And the story what I'd like to tell here is, these are pumpkin plants. When I was, I guess I was 9 years old, I had our 4th grade class planted pumpkin plants. I had 3 in the little milk cartons, and we planted our pumpkin plants, and it was a science class, so we measured the pumpkin plants every day, and mine were the tallest in the class. I was really, I was very competitive, so I was really happy about that. And I brought the plants home, and my next door neighbor grandfather figure said he would help me plant the plants. And he did, but unfortunately he did it while I was at school the next day. So I got home and my little pumpkin plants were planted in the ground, and they looked a lot shorter than I remembered them in the milk cartons. So I reached and I pulled one of them up a little bit to make it taller. And I heard a little snap, and I thought, uh-oh. Well, sure enough, the next day that plant is lying over dead. But the other 2 plants are still there. And what he showed me, he got some fish fertilizer, which smelled really bad, mixed it in water. I thought it was awful, and how could the plants possibly like that? But he put it on the plants, and my goodness, those plants grew to be these enormous pumpkin plants in a very short period of time. And I learned 2 lessons there that I have been learning ever since. Lesson number 1 is you can't force growth. You can't force it. You have to allow it to happen. So that's the first thing, is that you try to make it happen, and you might break something. You might even destroy what you're trying to create. The second thing was you give the plants what they want and what they want. You create the environment that they like, and they grow. And those 2 lessons, it seems I keep learning them over and over and over and over again. Energy flow, so the energy flow in the system. How many of you recognize this plant? This is star thistle. I tell a story in my book about star thistle, and this is another one of those learning not to force things. But when I first arrived at the farm in Lake County, it was traditional agriculture, so there had been a lot of work of the soil on that farm, a lot of compaction, and there was a lot of star thistle on that farm. And I had decided with this energy and zeal that it was either me or the star thistle. And so I was going to go after that star thistle, and I was going to just take it out. And I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and it was like this, now it was a star thistle war. And as it turns out, the star thistle was wiser than I was, and it was also stronger than I was at the time. And I would end up at the day with my hands bloody, and it's like the star thistle was winning the war. It was reseeding itself. I could see it happening. So what I did instead, I remembered, it's like a memory thing. I said, I need to apply my permaculture principles here. And one of the key principles in permaculture is thoughtful and protracted observation. So I took a step back and I said, let's look at the star thistle. What is it doing? And is there a way to love this? The problem is the opportunity. Is there a way to find the opportunity in this star thistle? So I observed and observed and observed, and I observed a lot of things. One thing I observed is when the ground was wet, but not wet for a long time, but wet enough, the star thistle could be pulled out easily, taproot and all. What I observed is if you waited too long, the leaves got soft and they broke off. Instead of pulling it out, taproot and all, the plant just kept coming back. So I observed that. I observed what the star thistle was doing. It was colonizing bare ground. That's its job. It has a job to do. Its job is to colonize bare ground and quickly get some biomass going in that bare ground. It was an invasive, and an invasive loves bare ground. So I decided to do its job for it. I spread straw I planted other things. The spreading of straw and the watering actually, within a year and a half, that plus some modest pulling of star thistle eliminated the star thistle problem. And it was just a regular discipline, and it became, for me, the opportunity of it was almost contemplative. It was almost a spiritual practice, actually, just getting out there every day, doing a little bit, and realizing that it was just, over time, it was making a difference. That's me and a goat, and I have a lot of learning around goats, but I'll only share one story here, and that is that this is the story of beneficial relationships. We have a walnut orchard, and you can see that late spring, if we didn't get out there to mow, this is what it looked like. And I ended up with a colleague, actually a co-community member, who started a business with Kiko goats, and her business was to bring in 80 goats to a landscape and fence it off and then let the goats mow. And this turned out to be an absolutely wonderful relationship. They like star thistle, by the way, but they also, they mow and they fertilize. And they're also really friendly, so that was one added benefit. So there were many, many, many functions that these goats played. One was to just center me, as you can see there. Now, the fourth principle, and this is one that's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because we need to dream big. We need to have a big dream, but we're really kidding ourselves if we think we know how that dream is going to unfold. Dream big. And this is the example I'm going to use. This is actually in Lake County as well. And one of the things that I did early in Lake County, when I was first taking office, actually, I was looking at the situation saying, what's one of the biggest problems? You know, we have a lot of problems. And Lake County's problems stem from many years of environmental degradation, in part because the mills up there helped build San Francisco. The mercury mines up there helped with the gold rush. One of the first histories of Lake County ever written was basically a manual of all the resources to exploit in the region. So we're at the end of years and years and years of exploitation, and the population of Lake County is only 65,000 people. And of the 65,000 people, probably 14,000 have a paycheck of some kind, and 11% of them are disabled. 21%, which in most counties it would be 10%. 21% of the population of Lake County, 20 or 21% are over 65. So we have some real demographic challenges there. The good news is we have a lot of wide open space. We have a lot of land that's inexpensive, and we have still not destroyed the environment up there. So it's like absolutely gorgeous. We have a growing number of permaculturists coming up there for the inexpensive land, and with that come the attitudes of how to transform community, which is amazing. But one of the problems we had was that most people have a limited view of their capabilities, right? They've been in poverty, or they've been in a community where they just haven't, they're in cycles of poverty. And so the other problem is that the same people seem to be doing things over and over and over again. So you have the same group of people that are, you know, the organizing energy is limited to a small group of people. Is this familiar to anyone here? Okay, so it seems like the same people are the ones that are showing up at the meetings and doing all the things. And so my thinking at the time was, well, I need to find a way to get people to have an experience of volunteerism that might lead them to do more. But you can't come out and say, just volunteer, because they have in their mind what that means. I'm not the type of person that volunteers, or that sounds like a lot of work, or whatever. So what we did instead was we picked a little park-like setting right along the highway, and we decided to build a bench. And we also decided to build a little covering on the way back bench just to show, basically indicate that it might be possible to do more with these materials than build a bench. You could actually build something tall like a house, or you can create more with natural materials. And so we were out there, and the park department of Lake County actually kind of got into it and let us put the little adobe on top of the sign too. You can see the little sign there for Lucerne Creek Park. But what we did was we started creating this little bench, and anybody who wanted to stop by and get their feet in the mud or their hands in the mud was invited to do so. We had a big old sign that said, "Come join us." And we ended up with 100 volunteers working on this project, just having maybe their first experience of volunteerism. Well, that's not the end of the story. I thought that was good, and I personally, at the time, my big vision was volunteers springing up all over Lake County. That's not what happened with this story. What happened was a core group of those volunteers got really excited and wanted to do it again, and that's where they created Clark's Island, and that was the floating island. There's a big island of land, and then that floating island was one project off of Clark's Island. But Clark's Island Sustainability Initiative was to take a little island that was basically an environmental disaster. It was a bunch of dilapidated RVs and sewer system leaking into the lake, and we needed to move those people off that island, find new places for them to live, and reclaim that island as an eco park, which we did. The same core group of volunteers, some of whom had showed up at this project, wanted to create a natural building there. And because that project was going on also right on the highway, some students from University of San Francisco showed up to help. And it turns out one of their instructors, the head of the architecture department of UCSF, was there. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was USF, University of San Francisco. So they show up, they're helping with this project of cob building along Clark's Island, and we got to talking with them about maybe it's possible to have an architecture program or an offshoot of it up in Lake County. Wouldn't you need like a rural studio for this kind of architecture? And they really were interested. In fact, they still are. They were so interested that as the county redevelopment agency, this is when there were redevelopment agencies, we had an old building that was about to fall apart, and we purchased the building, re-roofed it, and put out an RFP thinking that University of San Francisco would bid on it, which they did not do. But what did happen, this is the building. It's a little bit inside like the Ahwahnee Hotel. I mean, it's actually an amazing building. We saved the building, and we ended up with a bidder for that building, which is Marymount California University, and they have now established a 4-year campus in Lake County. That happened because of the bench in Lucerne. So, I mean, I would have never dreamed that, but that's what happened. So you never know where the energy is going to flow. You don't know where the end is. But if you dream big and you have this audacious plan that you're going to be addressing problems on the small scale that might have an impact on the large scale, you never know where that's going to go.
Is this on Lakeport or the other side?
This is on the north shore. So if you're on Highway 20 and you travel from Upper Lake all the way to the Calusa County line, it's right along the shores of Clear Lake in Lucerne. And actually, this is not on the shore. It's up in the town of Lucerne. It's up 13th Avenue.
Nice Lucerne cutoff is somewhere in there.
It's after that, yeah. So if you go from Upper Lake through Nice to Lucerne, and there are avenues there, it's 13th up the hill. I think we might have renamed it. We might have renamed it Castle Drive or something. So Lake County, and this is 65,000 residents in Lake County. We now own a castle and a mountain. We bought Mount Konocti as well, and have begun a trail system up there with the same volunteer energies that believe this sort of thing was possible. We got a grant from the National Park Service. We have a trails plan that's amazing, and the first trails we put in place were water trails because they're easy, and we could tell people where to stop and have lunch with their kayaking and all that. And if you kayak through Rodman Slough, it's like you're going back 250 years. You're in the middle of amazing wildlife. It's absolutely gorgeous. And we have some trails that have begun, including a trail to the top of Mount Konocti that includes a view of Mount Shasta. I mean, you can see everything up there, so it's really beautiful. But this happened as a result of the project in Lucerne, which I find, so this is kind of the moral of the story is start small. Start small. So when starting small, this is the fun part. So here we are again, right off of Clark's Island. We actually put a kayak dock out there, and we tested different plants in this floating dock with the same Brillo material that cleans up the water, along with the plants taking nutrients out of the water. So this is, we were demonstrating here what we decided to do, and again, I'm back to points of leverage. We decided to try to find points of leverage that address the bigger problem. So one of the big problems is nutrients in Clear Lake. There are a lot of landowners around the lake that have docks. What if we could show a dock that had the capacity to actually clean the water? And that was this demonstration. It was a floating island dock, basically. And we have, this hasn't gone anywhere yet. It's a business opportunity for somebody. But this, it did show the possibility for anybody who owned property along the lake. But what did happen, we haven't seen a lot of people buying docks, but what we have seen is we've seen folks interested in planting tules again. So Clear Lake, the biggest single challenge in Clear Lake is it's lost 90% or more of its wetlands around the lake. The tule wetlands that used to filter the streams that led into Clear Lake were taken out by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 20s, 30s, and 40s to build levees and reclaim land from nature. And as you know, nature always wins. So those levees have since deteriorated, and they will eventually breach on a flood year. And when they do, if they breach in an uncontrolled way, we'll see all kinds of devastation of potential homes and whatever toxic waste might be, underground tanks or whatever might be out there. So the county's been in a process of trying to move people out of harm's way, buy up the property on a very slow basis, and as you know, as a county that's not very rich, that's going to take a long, long time. So we're kind of counting on, ironically, the Army Corps of Engineers to help with the project, and that's going to happen, hopefully. But again, we're looking for these points of leverage, but what happened as a result of that island, a lot of people got excited about what they could do as individuals around the lake and started tule planting exercises and are looking for tules to plant. And so we're beginning to see some individuals take matters into their own hands and begin to plant tules around Clear Lake. I would like to see that whole wetland restored, and that's actually one of the bigger projects that hopefully the county will be involved in as time goes on. So leverage. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I can move the world. Archimedes. How do we choose the projects? How do we choose those projects? This is where I'm going to introduce the concept of seed balls. How many of you already know about seed balls? Okay, so you know what they are. They are a small guild of seeds, and a guild being seeds that like each other. They contribute to each other. So one might be tall, the other might be a vine that could grow on it. They're a guild. They are protected by clay in a ball. They have in the seed ball a little bit of compost, which are the nutrients that they need. So in a sense, they're a self-contained little package. Beautiful little package. And think about that like a project. They're a little package that they're designed for the big picture, which is to restore devastated places. So they're designed so that you throw them into devastated places, and when the water is right, the conditions are right, the temperature's right, everything's right, they sprout, they take care of each other long enough to establish themselves, and then they take off. And in the seed ball is the vision for the whole restoration, but it's just one seed ball. But you can have a lot of them. You can replicate them, and if one of them doesn't make it, maybe others will. Maybe others will. So they're replicable, and that's really the key. So for me, the main skill that I needed to acquire, and actually one of the big reasons I wrote the book, was to remind me of what I knew already. And I'm kind of one of these people that forget a lot, so I open my own book and go, wow, I didn't know that. But it's to remind me. It's to remind me that I need to figure out where to place my energy. What is mine to do? Where do I place my energy right now? Saying no is just as important as saying yes. These points of leverage where a little bit of energy can go a long way. You don't need to save the whole world. You just need to make sure that seed ball that is you is managed well and is doing what you can do, and trust that in your light shining, that others will do their part too. Yes?
How did you figure out which plants could go together in that seed ball?
In the seed ball. That's a great question for a permaculturist who loves seeds, but my answer to that is this. I picked a plant that would grow tall. Like in this particular seed ball, I picked oat. And I had some vetch because they're nitrogen fixers and I wanted nitrogen fixing in the soil. I picked and some other legumes. I had some beans, and actually I bought the mix from Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, which is the soil builder mix. And I just studied what seeds are in their soil builder mix. They had oats, vetch, peas, and some other legumes in there. So a lot of nitrogen fixers, and hopefully a dynamic accumulator, something that'll bring up nutrients from the soil eventually. So you want some mix that will be able to support each other initially, but also be able to draw from that devastated soil and begin to create soil. And so I'm not the expert on like how to select that guild of seeds, but I found Peaceful Valley Farm Supply, they're pretty good at it, so I use their advice. So for me, the main idea here, though, is to find where to put my energy. Find where to put my energy. Every now and then I feel like the little fish Nemo in the movie Finding Nemo, when the fish are all caught in the net and Nemo's swimming around the outside, and he can swim in and out of the net, actually, because he's small enough to get in and out. And he's saying, pull, pull, pull. And I feel like I'm sometimes Nemo saying, find out what's yours to do and do it. That's my only message, really. Find out what's yours to do, what you love to do, what joy is drawing you to, and do it. Do it. Slough off the cynicism. Find a source of, turn your anger into passion, and do what brings you joy. So the biggest question we ask ourselves, at least I ask myself, is what is mine to do at this moment? And I can't answer that question for you. I can only answer that for myself. What is mine to do at this moment in time? And at any given time, that might be something large or small. It might be evolutionary or revolutionary. It might be to rest. It might be to grieve. It might be to dance. It might be to plant a garden. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is for you, but something in you knows. And so the task, I believe, is to look inside and discover what that is at any given moment in time. We can only know the next step. So think big, dream big, start small with that one next step. And once you do that next step, you're dealing with the limiting factor. And what's really cool about it is the problem is the opportunity to discover that limiting factor. So here's my advice for how to thrive and prosper while changing the world. And this is just my advice for myself. Hopefully it'll have some applicability for you too. Number one, start with the soil. S. I've highlighted the S there. So this is seeds. Start with the soil. Number two, think like an ecosystem. Look at the whole system. Think like an ecosystem. Number three, pay attention to the energy flows in the system, in yourself. Find ways to divert the energies that aren't helpful and adapt to the energies that are helpful. But align with those energies and allow them to emerge. Allow them to do what they do naturally. Dream big, but start small. So the question, what is mine to do? Because we're creative and we're sensitive, we are in a system that is essentially hostile to new ideas and new growth. And in order to transform the system, we have to not only survive, but we have to thrive to transform it. So I often ponder the question, how do I survive and thrive and transform this system that I'm in? Be a gardener. That's the way to do it. It really is. What nutrients do you need to thrive? Commit to that big vision. What is audacious in that vision? What's audacious? And then start small. Start small. If I leave you with one question that sums it all up, it's this one. What is mine to do? We're here to celebrate. Thomas Berry says that we are the universe celebrating itself. We're here to celebrate. It's time to celebrate. Can we celebrate at a time when we see everything unraveling around us? Yes, it's our job. That's what we do. That's what we do. So with that, I will close and just open it up for conversation and questions about gardening. Everything is a garden. So my expertise is in human systems. I do garden, and I'm actually not as good a gardener as I would like to be, but I'm not a bad gardener. I learn more from the garden than it learns from me, for sure. So.